Hello and welcome to the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast. I'm Ola Ojiako. On this podcast, I speak with world-class leaders and doers about themselves and a variety of topics spanning Agile, lean innovation, business, leadership, and much more, with actionable takeaways for you, the listener. This episode is a special one to me. I am humbled and honored to be in the virtual presence of giants and pioneers who have shaped the Agile coaching discipline into what we know it as today. I have with me Lyssa Adkins and Michael Hamman. Not just one, but two. So this is like I won the lottery today. And I'm so excited to have you both on the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast for this episode. Welcome. Now, Lyssa, I had the honor of interviewing just you for an earlier episode, and for the benefit of the audience, for most people, Michael wouldn't be a stranger. They would be well acquainted with him. But for some of my audience who may not be familiar with, your background, Michael, would you mind telling us about yourself?
Where do I even start?
I understand you used to be a music composer, software engineer, or developer. How did that trajectory lead you to here?
Well, actually, for those years when I was a composer and a scholar, I had a dual life. One life was the sort of creative life of the artist and the writer, but the other life was that I actually was working with people. And I got exposed to transformational learning in 1985 when I took a course. In fact, even before then, I got exposed to it because other people had taken this course. It was called the EST training. And so, I got trained to lead seminars back in the 80s and early 90s. And I brought all of that into my work with software teams. And at first I was a technical, advisor. And then I got into how do we make these teams work better? And that just, one thing led to the next. And, I studied human systems and systems thinking and coaching. I was trained in professional coaching. I brought all that into the Agile world when I started Big Guns in 2004. Specifically in corporate enterprise Agile coaching, probably one of the earlier people to be doing that. And but I was really known for bringing this sort of transformative angle to it. So there was always some people thought it was a bit odd, like I was kind of like the weird uncle in the room, but people really liked it because they found something shifting in themselves while they were learning to do this thing called Agile and Scrum and XP and all that kind of stuff. And so it sort of has just grown, my work has really grown from there. And maybe just to add one last piece, that I regard my own personal transformation as part of the work that I do with other people and with organizations. For me, they're inseparable. And the degree that I myself am evolving and developing, then I can become an authentic conduit for others to do the same.
Wow, that's very inspirational. Thank you, Michael, for that great overview. Lyssa, I'd love to get your crack at it.
Yeah, what I want to say about Michael is that you brought in a word, Ula, that I want to just reprise here, which is pioneer. Mm-hmm. So Michael's talked about his trajectory with transformational learning. And he is indeed a pioneer in that, and sort of making the implicit explicit, And that's exactly what he was doing with computer music as a composer. And it was at the very early dawn of computers making sounds. That's where Michael Hamman composed his works, right? Wow. And so it's a confluence of a couple different worlds coming together that he was able to bring forth into a new composition. And that's exactly what's happening here now with bringing these different worlds and experiences and lived experiences together in this new composition called vertical facilitation.
Well, thank you, Lyssa. That brings us segues nicely into, in terms of what you've been working on lately. So you mentioned vertical facilitation, but before we get to vertical facilitation, so Michael, I was looking at your website earlier on, michaelhamman.com, and you said something about vertical learning being a process by which we evolve the psychological and emotional structuring process that determine how we think, understand, and emotionally grasp our work. Do you want to expand on that, please? Vertical learning before we get to vertical facilitation.
Yeah, I think what I would say about that is that at any given moment, there are the things that we're doing. So at any given moment, we are in action, and we have a sense of where we're going in our action. So we have a sense of direction, maybe even a goal. We might even have a vision, right? And so there's the world of our action, and at the same time, there's that world, there's that which informs our action at any given moment. There's a sort of sense making that's going on that informs our action, that informs what action we'll take, what's the appropriate action, how might we act. And it also determines the competency with which we act. So there's this sense making that's going on. And you could say that it's an individual sense making, a kind of a psychological layer, but it's also something that happens with us collectively. And so it's this realm that's happening of which we are, for the most part, unaware. And so what vertical learning is about is to bring awareness to that realm, that dimension, which informs our capacity for effective action. And to the degree we become aware of that realm, we become better able at crafting action that is truly effective, that is action that is truly congruent with what it is that we are committed to, what it is that we intend.
What comes out to me is, that vertical learning is about bringing awareness to the realm that informs how we act when we've made sense of our environment. That's powerful. Lyssa, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think I'll add the dimension of why this is even important right now. I mean, there's, for a long time, sort of just getting more and more skills, more and more competencies, sort of as a collection, as a basket of things we were now capable of doing. For a long time, that was really sufficient for the context that most of us were in. And, you probably know, Ula, and maybe everyone listening, that we're in this age of acceleration where everything is speeding up. Almost every graph looks like a hockey stick. And,
yes.
and things are not straightforward anymore. In fact, the complexity of the situations that get served up to us, especially those ones we don't want to have on our plates, that complexity is beyond most of our meaning making right now. And so that's what this is about. It's about closing that gap between the complexity of the situations we're in and the complexity of our own meaning making, so that we can be more of a match for the confounding, ever-changing, constantly anxiety producing situations that we find ourselves in our whole life, and especially in business these days. So there's a really important thing pulling us forward to help and wanting us to be more capable for the environment we're actually in. And so I think that's why it's up for us and up for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, no, what you're saying, Lyssa, just it makes me think of this metaphor that I often use, that it's that meaning making that Lyssa was just referring to, that which we need to bring to a higher level of complexity to meet the complexity of the world. It's a bit like, you could think of it analogically as a kind of operating system, like an operating system metaphor that, I notice on my phone, that there are a lot of apps that won't install on my phone because I have to upgrade the operating system. And similarly, in the world of the complex world, the world, I love what you just said, the
Hockey stick.
yeah, all the graphs are hockey sticks now. In the world in which all the graphs are hockey sticks, right? We need new apps. Apps are our behaviors, the actions that we take. And in order to take the kinds of actions that we need to take in this world of hockey stick graphs, we need to upgrade the operating system that informs those actions. And that's what vertical learning is all about.
And to just explore that metaphor of the operating system, would it have any relationship with, our mindset, our attitudes, or worldview?
Absolutely. In fact, oftentimes we use the word mindset as a kind of shortcut term to point to this realm, but unfortunately, for the most part, we don't. We're pretty good in the Agile world at eliciting ways of understanding things that have to do with engineering and basic management and product management. And so we've gotten very good. Like business agility has taught us a lot about how to bring a kind of agile competency, agile capacity for action, I guess you could say. The thing we haven't gotten very good at, and that's what the work we're up to here, is to what's the nature of mindset? What's the science and the research behind mindset, which has a comparable depth, a comparable legacy to the various engineering and complexity science lineage that inform other aspects of Agile. And so this is really about bringing those sort of human technology, the lineage of human technology to bear to help us grow that inner operating system. So this is, in many ways, it's a research-based and science-based sort of set of practices as much as it's art.
So based on what you've said, that would bring me to the concept of inner versus outer agility. Because you said we've learned a lot, Agile, business agility, but to an extent, and this is me summarizing what I think I've heard from you, Michael, it's we've kind of focused on the engineering of products and services, but there is the inner work we need to do to be able to operate more effectively in a world of hockey stick graphs, or some other people will call it the VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex. I've forgotten what the A means. So can we, ambiguous, thank you so much, Lyssa. So how would this tie in with the concept of outer versus inner agility?
Young children learn programming, like young 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds. But it's unlikely that they'll ever be able to build the kinds of huge software systems that professional software engineers are able to build. And it's partly due to skill, but at some point, that young child, you could teach them more and more advanced programming skills, but at some point they're not going to be able to absorb it. And that points to their inner meaning making. And it's similar in organizations that we could teach them, Agile frameworks, but they may get better and better at it at first, but then at some point they hit a ceiling, and that ceiling is defined by their capacity for inner agility. And so when we hit the ceiling, we could see that as a signal, wow, we need to start to do some work on both our individual and our collectively held sense-making frames if we're going to actually get past that ceiling. We will not get past that ceiling. I think we all know that by now. Unless something shifts in the area of inner agility, or you could say mindset. But I use the word mindset somewhat reluctantly because it's become a buzzword, and we really, for the most part, we really don't know what it means.
I didn't mean to impose that word on you. That was me trying to make sense.
It's out there.
Okay, yes.
The word is so out there, and,
Yes.
so I kind of want to, whenever I have an opportunity to do a little bit of violence to that word, I try to talk through it.
No worries at all. And what something you said about, speak individuals and teams hitting the ceiling, getting to a limit with applying the agile frameworks due to their operating systems needing an upgrade. It reminds me of I believe it's the writing of John Maxwell. He's a known leadership expert, and he has something called, the leadership law of the lead. You can only lead effectively to a certain extent, and it kind of ties in with what you're saying about you'd have to do the work, because once you hit that limit, you have a choice either to remain at that level or you upgrade yourself. You expand your capacity by learning, by being coached, by being willing to unlearn and relearn, or learn new things, but change the way you do things to get to the next level. Yeah. Now, how can one upgrade their operating system?
Well, that's what vertical learning really ultimately points to, and it's a different kind of learning. So you could say that there are three different kinds of learning. The first is informational learning, where we basically teach concepts and we give information, and the idea is that then people take that information or those concepts and apply it into their life and into their work. And so that's one form of learning, perfectly valid and legitimate for certain kinds of learning needs, I guess you could say. The second kind of learning, or the second sort of method of learning, is behavioral, where we teach skills and competencies to people with the idea that they will then take those skills and competencies out into their world and exercise those skills and competencies. The problem is that what we often find is that both in terms of informational learning and behavioral learning, is that there's a missing ingredient. Oftentimes, for instance, people don't know when it's appropriate to bring a certain information to bear in a given moment, or for people who have learned particular skills, they find themselves unable to exercise those skills when it really matters, when the heat gets high. And this is where the third quality of learning comes in, which is called transformational learning. And transformational learning doesn't happen in the same realm as informational and behavioral learning. It's not taught by telling people. It's not even taught, through behavioral practice, although that can be part of it. It has to be taught in a very different way. And this is where vertical facilitation builds, because you can only bring about transformational learning through the design of a learning environment. It can only be done by creating situations in which people experience a kind of inner dilemma between how the categories with which they already make sense and the category that is likely to be necessary to make sense of the current situation being presented to them.
Lyssa, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, just that it is so much fun to present a group of people with a disorienting dilemma and to watch them reach the edge of their known meaning making, and to find out that it's actually not the edge of the world. They're not going to fall off the world. They can say, oh wow, now I see that frame of reference I was holding is just a frame of reference. It's actually not how the world is. Now I can look at it. I can take it off of me and look at it as an object and say, okay, well, how has this frame of reference served me in the past? And do I still need it now? What pieces am I bringing forward as I expand into other frames of reference that can inform me more completely about the situation I'm in? And so it's just, for about a decade, I suppose, Michael Hamman and I were involved, this guy right here, with others, were involved in conducting these transformational learning environments in our Agile coaching work. And it is such a joy. It is such a joy to see people break through this concrete, calcified way that they were viewing the world, and to realize, there's like a field out here with flowers and butterflies, and there's all kinds of other options now available to me. And we have a lot of lived experience in those kinds of transformational education environments. And that builds on training that we've all had, but also on Michael's really long history with transformational education environments. And I think the modern need for us to help others increase their vertical capabilities.
I know that some of my audience or people who are listening or watching would be wondering what vertical facilitation is. And they also would be wondering if you have any stories. And of course, I'm here as your students. Maybe there would be a demonstration. But before we all, go to the stories and all that, what's vertical facilitation? Because you've already defined for us what vertical learning is.
I want to set the stage for Michael to say what it is, because this is where Michael's thought leadership is really coming to bear in the world. He's creating a new composition for us to live in, because he's taking what was once implicit about vertical facilitation, learning environments, and making it explicit. And so many people have components of this in their leadership development programs, in their Agile coach training, in their whatever they're doing. But to make it more explicit and usable for them would really amp up the results they're getting from whatever program they're in. And so those are the people who we're trying to reach. And I just want to say this is a new composition.
Thank you, Lyssa. Michael, please.
I feel incredibly humbled by what you've been saying, Lyssa. Thank you. Yeah, I would say that vertical facilitation is a way of working with groups leaderfully. So it's a leaderful way of working with groups. So it's not, the typical sort of neutrality of facilitation that we ordinarily think of it. So there's a leaderful intention, but the leaderful intention has to do with being able to be attentive to what's the quality of the sense making that's going on in this moment with this individual, in the interactions between these two individuals, or the interactions among the individuals within a group, and the group energy. So vertical facilitation is about paying attention to all of these things with an ear for what's going on here developmentally. And developmentally is just another word for vertically. What is the sense making that's going on? And vertical facilitation is about creating moments, creating situational moments in which people experience what Lyssa just termed a moment ago, a disorienting dilemma. And a disorienting dilemma, again, is the recognition that something about the way that I'm making sense of this situation is insufficient to be able to successfully manage myself in that situation. So it's a kind of an aha, and sometimes it's a moment of fear or anxiety, right? And so vertical facilitation includes having this sort of loving manner that allows for people to come face to face with whatever emotions they are experiencing as they encounter a particular disorienting dilemma. And just to say one more thing about that, the disorienting dilemma can be experienced within an individual or within a group. And vertical facilitation is simply about surfacing moments in which that disorienting dilemma becomes present for people, whether individuals or a whole group, such that they can make a choice. So the important thing here is awareness and choice. And I called it an existential choice because it's a choice in how to exist in relation to this situation. And when people can make that choice toward a more complex way of making sense, not only does it alter the way they relate to this particular situation, but in that very alteration, it alters the sort of neural connections by which they make sense of other similar situations. And so that's what we mean by transformation. A transformation occurs when there's an alteration through the exercise of this existential choice of the kind of neural network by which we've come to make sense of a given situation or set of situations. So that's about the shortest way I could say it.
Well, and let me just highlight how incredibly powerful this fulcrum is. Because once we can get up underneath the unexamined lenses that people are looking at the world through, and once we can help them encounter this thing that used to be like perfectly fine and is somehow limiting now, then it's not only the situation that they're presented with right now that has different outcomes and maybe more success, but it's everything like this and everything in the future that is related that gets a lift. I mean, so like the leverage capability is really, really high with this kind of development and this kind of transformational experience.
Yeah, and at the expense of elongating this part, I just want to build on something that Lyssa said here, that part of what happens when vertical learning happens, or when transformational learning happens, is that people have state experiences. And so a state experience, we've all had them. It's a moment, it's a kind of an aha moment. So it's a sort of cognitive insight, which is combined with an emotion. It's a certain emotion. And you could say that at those moments, something in us gets connected to something much deeper. It's like we have a moment where we're drilling down into some deeper part of ourselves and being able to pull up a kind of wisdom. Now, we've all had these, these moments of, we call them state experiences. And oftentimes we poo-poo state experiences because, well, that was so, last week, because quote unquote state experiences fade. Now, part of what happens with deliberate vertical facilitation is that we stage sequences of moments in which people experience state experiences. And what the research shows is that when people can repeat state experiences, it tightens up the new neural connections that get created during any given state experience. And so there are many pieces to the art of vertical facilitation. And one of them is this kind of engineering of situations that bring about these state experiences where people have an aha by virtue of having gotten to the other side of some sort of disorienting dilemma.
Are there any stories that you could share highlighting, like where you facilitated or you implemented vertical facilitation, created a situation or scenario where people were put into where they experienced dilemmas, and then you were able to facilitate them to get to that state experience? Are there any stories that you could share, just to give some of, myself included, and a kind of an example that we could identify with?
Yeah, I think I'd like for us to offer a couple of examples, maybe one that's maybe from when we were doing the coaching after teams classes. And then I'd like to offer an example from something that's a little bit more personal, in tone. So I don't know. Do you want to speak to the first one, Lyssa?
Well, what I'd love us to do is for you to offer the example, and then let me help you make it clear how that example created heat experiences, connected to the bigger game, like the different aspects of vertical facilitation that you are now exposing for the world.
Yeah.
That sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. So the first example used to happen a lot when we were teaching this class at coaching Agile teams, and a lot of our listeners have probably took it years ago. And there's a moment in that class. This is just one example of many such moments. But there's a moment in this class where we teach a skill that we called level 2 listening. And the distinction between level 1 and level 2 listening. And level 1, just to say something about that distinction to get the example across. Level 1 listening is listening to my own thoughts and paying attention to my own thoughts. I'm with this other person, but I'm really not with them. Whereas level 2 listening is I'm really with them. And I'm not only hearing what they're saying, but I'm actually I'm not only listening to what they're saying, but I'm listening for who this person is. So there's a quality of genuine relationship in this moment. And I'm not trying to take this person anywhere. I'm not trying to get them, I'm not trying to figure anything out with them. And so now when and then we invite people to practice this. And what happens invariably is that people have this, first of all, it's very uncomfortable initially. So they have this disorienting dilemma because they're so used to like having to figure out, okay, well, how can I help this person? Or what can I say? Or, I'm not really understanding what this person's saying, or, all the stuff that goes on when we're in that level 1 listening. So there's a disorienting dilemma, but then there's the aha that happens when something shifts in the way that the other person is expressing themselves. Like they suddenly become more maybe coherent, or they become more self-expressive, or maybe authentic. And so they have the experience of that connection, and it becomes possible for them to make that existential choice. Wow, that was really amazing. Typically we have those kinds of experiences when we're falling in love, but not when I'm talking with somebody that I just met earlier today. So that would be one example.
Just to clarify something that Michael said about level 1 listening versus level 2 listening, would you say level 2 listening again? And this is me trying to make sense of the terminology. Would that equate to what I know as active listening? Because that is really about just listening, not just for the words that are being said, but what's the, are there any emotions being conveyed with it? Was the body language? Can you read in between the lines? But just focusing on what they're saying without thinking about what your response is going to be, or what your counter argument is going to be.
Yeah, I would say that level 2 listening, how I would really clearly differentiate it, is that it's me being silent. So I'm not trying to establish camaraderie with this other person, quote unquote camaraderie. I'm simply being present and hearing what they're saying and listening to what they're saying and being attentive to who they're being. And what I understand about active listening is that sometimes you want to say things to indicate to the person that you're following them, that you're with them. And we find that to be actually counterintuitively perhaps a bit distracting, whereas level 2 listening is it's actually more uncomfortable because we're not really saying anything to clarify level 2 listening there.
Yeah, and for people who are more interested in that language level 2 listening comes from the coactive coaching school. It's often also called focused listening or listening for. And active listening is an adjacent and related topic, but has the history that Michael just talked about that sometimes is counterproductive. Okay, Michael, for that situation that you just talked about, which used to happen every single time in every single coaching Agile teams class, we could rely on this being a disorienting dilemma for people, right? So just to be clear about the 4 perspectives: heat experiences, stretch practices, social container, and bigger game. So how does that situation, how is it an example of heat experience?
So a disorienting dilemma is a heat experience. And by a heat experience, we mean it's an experience in which something in us gets challenged. Some known category gets challenged. And we often feel it at first as anxiety. Sometimes we feel it as a sense of excitement. Oftentimes it's a mix of feelings. But it's always this sense that something is getting challenged. Some category. I don't mean us as a person's getting challenged, but the way in which we are making sense of something is getting challenged in the moment in which that sense making is occurring. So it can't happen, retroactively. It can't happen with respect to something that I did or said yesterday. It has to be elicited in this moment. And that's the key to creating a heat experience. And there are lots of different ways to create heat experiences, but that's one of them. That's the most classic way.
And I would say that people did experience that heat experience as very confronting. We would often ask, so what was that like? And we get like, I hated it. Oh my God, I felt so weird. Like it was like this whole mix. And then there would also be the person who would say like, oh, I found it so relieving, right? Like, so there's a whole mix of how people are dealing with it. And I think that moves to the second of the four that we could talk about now, which is social container. So like how in that situation was there a social container, Michael, that helped make this a vertical facilitation moment?
Yeah, great. So so this was toward the end of the first day of coaching Agile teams. And by that point, we had there's a way in which Lyssa, Michael Spade, and myself, the three of us who led these courses, there was a way in which we held the space. We use that term holding the space, which is paying attention to not only what's happening with individuals. So we might be interacting with an individual, but also scanning. We're constantly scanning the space to see what's happening. How is this landing? Does a space feel stuck? And from time to time, giving feedback to the group or to the class, wow, the energy feels stuck. What's happening? And so inviting people to get involved, to elicit their own awareness of the space or the group or the emotional energy, which oftentimes, we don't pay attention. As human beings, we are aware of these things, but we have so long ago lost our ability to have our awareness of that awareness. And so part of what happens is we elicit this awareness of group energy, and what that does, and combined with the fact that we're bringing people to these disorienting dilemmas, is a certain kind of bondedness happens. There's a unique quality of bondedness, and this is something that people always remarked about these courses, and in other courses that both Lyssa and I do. The quality of social bondedness creates an environment of safety, right? So we talk about emotional safety, right? But it makes it possible for us then to challenge each other. It makes it possible for the environment to be challenging. So it's both safe and challenging. In that moment, that environment was really starting to come alive.
On that point about the social container and saying you create a state where, well, not state, but you create a situation where there's a social bond with the group.
Yeah.
Would you say that something that would help with that bonding is trust, an element of trust that I can be vulnerable? Is there?
So trust is a tricky one because everyone's got a different definition of it.
True.
And so one of the things that we would do, and that I would suggest everyone do in a transformational learning environment, is to consciously and explicitly design the alliance of how this is going to go between all of us together. And the purpose for doing that is to put the participants in the driver's seat in terms of being responsible for their own experience, but also to empower the course leaders to lead people through these experiences. And so when someone would say, we would say something like, we would say something like, so what do we need in this environment for you to really get the most out of it? Oh, I need to trust it. Okay, great. What do you mean by trust? So once we get below sort of the easy word, then we get to what people really need in the container. And the most important thing then, as the course or as the program or as the leadership development longitudinal thing goes on, whatever thing you're doing, as it goes on, what the most important thing is for the leaders to constantly be affirming of bringing in vertical facilitation to whatever program you're doing. And the other two are stretch practices and bigger game.
So a stretch practice is a practice that requires that somebody stretch some known category. So it's very similar. It's very much related to, by the way, all four of these qualities, we call them design elements, overlap, and they synchronistically interact with one another. So they're not really to be seen in isolation. So a stretch practice is one that the practice of which requires that that something in my way of understanding things has to shift. So for instance, in this case, inviting people to practice level 2 listening, which by the time they did it for the third time, they were starting to get it. There was that shift from awareness of the disorienting dilemma to an existential choice. Wow, this is really a profound way to work with other people. And so the stretch practice here was a very simple one, which is this thing of level 2 listening. So, oftentimes, in fact, almost always, transformational learning happens through the introduction of some sort of stretch practice. That the stretch practice is a kind of vehicle, a kind of catalyst for creating a situational moment in which transformational learning becomes possible. Because I want us to keep in mind that this is not about reflecting on things that happened yesterday or last week. This is about bringing situations present in the moment. And there's a whole psychological research called memory reconsolidation that's in the background of all of this. We're not going to get into that right now, but it's an important technology. And this is why it's important to make these situations that are happening in the now. And so that would be an example of a stretch practice, the practice of which something has to shift in the way that somebody makes sense of something.
And to just be really clear about what the stretch practice was, like the first stretch practice was so simple on its face. It was basically this. Now that you have heard about level 1 listening, which is all about you, your ideas, how you want to be valuable, how you want to be smart, how you want to show this person you're listening. To level 2, which is you being focused on what they're saying, what's behind the words. And as you said earlier, Ulla, what's the emotional content that's going on there? So here's the instruction. You're going to listen to this person talk about something real and something that is on their mind for 3 minutes, and you're not going to say anything. And the reason you're not going to say anything is because you want some space in your mind to notice, when am I with them at level 2 and when do I fall back to level 1? No big deal. Just come back to level 2. So it created a new, on the face of it, very simple practice, but it confronted people's as yet unexamined beliefs about how they bring value.
And again, keep in mind that this is a synergy. So we need all four of these, right? So we've just related our thinking to 3 of these design elements: heat experiences, social container, and stretch practices. And so now there's a fourth one. You can kind of think of this as the legs of a table. The table may stand up with 3 legs, but it's going to be very wobbly. You need all 4 of these to create a solidly transformative learning environment. And the fourth of these is what we call a bigger game. And a bigger game is that we relate to what we're doing with a commitment to our own growth. So for instance, in this example, many people came into this course with a commitment to growing themselves as an Agile coach. And because of the way we open and start the class, people start to confront, what does it really mean to be an Agile coach? And people realize that that the commitment is ultimately to their own inner growth. They don't necessarily know exactly what that means. And it's a shared commitment. There's a quality. So this is the bigger game, has to be a shared commitment. It can't just be, I've got this commitment and maybe you do, but we're clear. We're kind of in the same boat together. And what holds us together is this shared commitment. It's what gets us through those moments, say, of conflict. When it's hard, or when I'm having kind of a really tough moment right here, and what gets me through it is this commitment to maybe even to other people, but certainly for myself.
So bigger game, shared commitments to a common goal. Lyssa, what do you want to add? Anything?
I would say so. Common goal makes it sound like we all want exactly the same thing, and that's not necessarily so. I like what Michael says. Like, we're all in the same boat together, and this boat is going in one direction. Right. There's a lot of variability between people's bigger games and how they think about those, and how that pulls them forward to get them through these heat experiences and all of that. And so that's, I think, another function of the bigger game that is really important. Is oftentimes people will come to a transformational learning experience thinking, I'm going to get some more tools and techniques. And fair enough, certainly they will along the way. But those tools and techniques, that sort of content, that knowledge that's getting transferred to people, is happening in the context of those people confronting the lenses, the glasses they had on, they didn't know they had on, confronting the fact that they're just sort of maybe bobbing through life and they're not connected to a bigger game. So all of that is happening at the same time. And so I would say that from a vertical facilitation perspective, the content that you are trying to convey as a leader of, let's say it's a leadership development program or a 5-day transformational learning experience, whatever it is, that content is a peer to the transformational learning experience itself.
Yeah.
They go together. And that's what makes it transformational. Otherwise, we could just, record a video and say, download this information to your brain, operate here, and that would work fine as long as the world weren't getting more complex. But it is.
So for people to get a real genuine taste for this, we are starting what we call a learning journey, a vertical facilitation learning journey. And the journey actually has two parts. The first part is a free series of webinars, emails, us providing resources so that people can get a strong foundational orientation around what vertical facilitation is, both conceptually, but also they will get an experience of it. Because it's very, very hard to demo it unless you're actually doing something with a group. So people who would like to see this at work, we invite you to go to verticalfacilitator.com and sign up and join the learning journey. The first part is free. The first 3 months is free. And then if it's something that is truly compelling, the second part, which is the paid part, takes you on a very deep dive into developing yourself in terms of skills and leadership stances as a vertical facilitator. So I think that's what I would invite people to do.
Okay. You said that there's a learning journey, 3-part experience, there's the webinar, and but part one is on the intro to vertical facilitation per se, and the second one is paid. I don't know if I got the third part. What would be part 3?
The third part is for people who do the deep dive, the paid deep dive portion, and it's a set of follow-up emails and other resources that help people to integrate what they learn. Because what happens during the deep dive, among other things, is that people actually design and hopefully facilitate a small either workshop or intervention of some sort where they actually practice the skills and distinctions that they have learned both in that
pre-orientation part, but also in the deep dive. So that's the third part. The name of the course is The Vertical Facilitator.
And there is something on, the latest posts you made on LinkedIn about something starting in August. Is this related to that course, or is it different?
It is. That's the deep dive portion. So between now and August are going to be the webinars, the free resources, the basically getting us into this new composition together.
Would it be in person or virtual? The August deep dive.
It will be virtual.
That's the hardest. So virtual is the hardest. We figure we might as well go ahead and go there, since that's going to be people's context, not all the time, but more of the time.
Yeah. So at a future time, probably the second time we do it, we will do the deep dive portion, or part of the deep dive portion as a live event.
And then one last thing, any final words for the audience in terms of what we've covered so far?
The only thing that comes to mind is that join us on this learning journey, and so you can get a taste of this. The best we've been able to do is sort of maybe elicit a little bit of the quality that's present when vertical facilitation is happening. And people may have noticed perhaps the way of being, a way of Lyssa and I working together. And Lyssa and I are both very skilled vertical facilitators. And so we would invite you to come and join us.
Thank you. Lyssa, anything?
I think we have said so much, and I've so appreciated the richness of this, and also that Ulla, so I'm so appreciative that this podcast gets to be part of the kickoff of what's truly a new thing.
Yeah. I also want to express my appreciation for you, Ulla, because this is, you have a certain grace in your manner, and I felt like this has just been a really wonderful podcast experience for me. Thank you.
I think both of you are very kind and very gracious. So, and the honor is mine, and it's a great experience for me.
That's all we have for now. Thanks for listening. If you like this show, do subscribe at www.agileinnovationleaders.com. That's agileinnovationleaders.com, or your favorite podcast provider. Also share with friends, and do leave a review on iTunes. This would help others find this show. I'd also love to hear from you, so please drop me an email at ola@agileinnovationleaders.com. Take care and God bless.